Most people harbor a fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of betrayal, viewing it as a sudden, explosive event, a single moment of weakness that shatters a glass house. For Clara, however, betrayal was not a lightning strike, but a slow, creeping ivy, a series of deliberate choices that gradually choked the life out of her marriage to Julian. She moved through her days under the intoxicating delusion that she was a master of two worlds, operating with a surgical precision that kept her domestic stability and her illicit passion in perfect parallel orbits. She didn't see herself as a villain. She saw herself as a woman who had simply found a way to have everything. In her mind, as long as Julian remained ignorant of the hidden corners of her heart, he remained unhurt. It was a convenient, self-serving logic that allowed her to maintain the facade of the devoted wife while indulging in the thrill of being someone else's secret. Her double life was a masterpiece of logistics, a delicate architecture built on a foundation of careful lies and strategically hidden moments. Clara had mastered the art of the mundane deception. There were the late-night strategy sessions at the office that were actually hours spent in the hushed, velvet booths of out-of-town bistros. There were the weekend yoga retreats that provided the cover for stolen days in sun-drenched hotel rooms where the world outside ceased to exist. She kept two phones, one a sleek silver device for the life she shared with Julian, and another, a small black burner phone tucked into the lining of an old winter coat she never wore. Every text message to Marcus was deleted the moment it was read, every call logged and then scrubbed with the cold efficiency of a forensic cleaner. She lived in the frantic, high-stakes space between the truth and the performance, finding a perverse sense of empowerment in her ability to deceive the man who knew her better than anyone else. She became an expert at shifting gears, transitioning from the passionate embrace of a lover to the gentle, familiar kiss of a wife in the time it took to drive the 30 minutes between Marcus's apartment and her own driveway. The collapse began on an ordinary Friday, a day that started with the same rhythmic predictability as any other. The morning air was thick with the scent of brewing coffee and the sound of the rain tapping a rhythmic code against the kitchen window. Clara had kissed Julian goodbye, her mind already racing toward the evening she had planned with Marcus. She had spent the day in a state of heightened anticipation, the secret thrill of her hidden life thrumming through her veins like a low-voltage current. She had even picked up a new dress, a deep emerald silk that Marcus had once mentioned would look stunning on her. As the afternoon shadows lengthened, she felt a sense of invincibility, a belief that her two worlds would continue to spin in their separate grooves forever. She arrived home later that evening, the taste of a celebratory drink still lingering on her lips, expecting to find Julian in his usual spot on the sofa, perhaps watching a documentary or caught up in a book. But the house was silent, bathed in a clinical, overhead light that felt jarringly bright. As Clara stepped into the foyer, her breath caught in her throat. Standing in the center of the hallway were 3 large suitcases, her designer luggage that usually lived in the darkness of the attic. They were packed to the point of bursting, their zippers straining against the weight of her life. Julian was sitting in the wing-back chair in the corner of the living room, a glass of scotch held loosely in his hand. He wasn't angry. He was terrifyingly still. The air in the room felt heavy, as if the oxygen had been replaced by lead. Clara's mind raced, searching for a lie, a joke, or a plausible explanation. But the sight of the suitcases anchored her to a reality she wasn't prepared to face. Julian looked at her, his eyes devoid of the warmth she had relied on for over a decade. And in that moment, the carefully constructed walls of her secret world began to groan under the pressure of his gaze. Julian didn't wait for her to speak. With a chilling, methodical calmness, he began to lay out the evidence of her infidelity. He didn't scream or throw accusations. He simply recited facts. He spoke of the GPS tracker he had placed on her car months ago, the transcripts of the messages she thought she had deleted, and the high-resolution photographs of her and Marcus together in places they thought were safe. He revealed that he hadn't just discovered the affair, he had spent the last 3 months observing it, watching her navigate her lies with a detached, clinical interest. He had known about the strategy sessions and the yoga retreats. He had even known about the emerald silk dress she was currently wearing beneath her trench coat. Julian's plan was a masterpiece of emotional warfare. He had waited until this specific Friday because he knew Marcus's wife was out of town, and he wanted to ensure there were no distractions for the final act of his calculated revelation. The psychological weight of his words was crushing. Julian picked up his phone and placed it on the coffee table, hitting the speakerphone button. He dialed a number that Clara recognized instantly. It was Marcus. When Marcus answered, his voice was light, expectant, and filled with the easy charm he used to navigate his own deceptions. Julian spoke with a cold, unwavering clarity, informing Marcus that Clara was currently standing in their living room with her suitcases packed, and that he was sending her over to Marcus's apartment permanently. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. Julian then dropped the final bomb. He had already sent the same dossier of evidence to Marcus's wife, who was currently on her way back from her trip early, and to the board of the firm where both Marcus and Clara worked. The illusion of the soulmates trapped in a different timeline vanished in an instant, replaced by the harsh, ugly reality of two people whose professional and personal lives were about to be incinerated. Within 20 minutes, a car pulled into the driveway. It was Marcus, but not the confident, dashing man Clara had spent the last year adoring. He looked frantic, his clothes disheveled, and his face pale in the glow of the porch light. He didn't come to rescue her. He came to plead for his own survival. As he burst into the house, he ignored Clara entirely, turning his desperate gaze toward Julian. He began to stammer excuses, claiming that Clara had been the one to pursue him, that it was a momentary lapse in judgment, and that he had never intended for it to become serious. The promises of someday and the whispers of a future together were revealed as the hollow, cheap currency of a man who only wanted the thrill of the chase without the burden of the catch. Clara stood frozen, watching the man she thought she loved dismantle every beautiful thing they had shared in a desperate attempt to save his own reputation. The collapse of the illusion was absolute. The Marcus she had invented in her mind was dead, replaced by a coward who was terrified of losing his comfortable life. Julian stood up, the movement slow and deliberate, and walked toward the front door. He didn't look at Marcus, and he didn't look at Clara. He simply opened the door and waited. Marcus, realizing that there was no more ground to be gained, turned and fled back to his car, leaving the woman he had promised to cherish standing among her packed suitcases. Clara moved toward Julian, her hand outstretched, a desperate plea forming on her lips. But he stepped back, his expression one of profound, icy indifference. He pointed toward the suitcases and then toward the darkness of the driveway. He told her that her life was no longer his concern, and that the house she had turned into a theater of lies was no longer her home. As Clara dragged her heavy suitcases across the threshold, the cold night air hit her like a physical blow. She stood on the gravel, the rain beginning to soak through her emerald silk dress, listening to the sound of her own ragged breathing. Behind her, she heard the heavy wooden door swing shut. The sound of the deadbolt sliding into place was final, a sharp metallic click that echoed in the silence of the suburban street. The lights in the foyer flickered off, one by one, until the house was nothing more than a dark silhouette against the stormy sky. She was alone, standing in the ruins of a life she had systematically destroyed, realizing too late that the most dangerous lie she had ever told was the one she had told herself, that she could betray the person who loved her and still have a place to call home. The door was locked, The illusion was gone, and the long, cold night of her own making had only just begun.